All right. A formal good morning and welcome to Kabbalah and Coffee. This is our weekly exploration of all chosen. And the topic that I've chosen is 8 deadly sins. Now, you might be familiar with the notion of 7 deadly sins, which you should also know does not have a strict Jewish origin, the notion of 7 deadly sins, although Judaism talks about certain things, certain behaviors that are destructive. Judaism speaks about certain behaviors that are, in the language of Pirkei Avot, for example, in the language of ethics of our fathers. These things drive human beings from the world, including, we spoke about this a few weeks ago, the idea of jealousy and kinna taiva v'kas. I think it was jealousy, lust, and anger drive a person, taking people out, so to speak. Nonetheless, I don't know that you find a formal list of seven deadly. I believe it has Christian origins, the notion of at least the list of 7 deadly sins. See, one of the advantages of doing this class from my computer is that I don't have to have you fact check me while I'm teaching. I can fact check myself. So here we go. The 7 deadly sins according to Wikipedia. And honestly, why would Wikipedia lead us in the wrong direction? At this point, we're assuming that Wikipedia has got it right. So 7 deadly sins. And this according to the standard list. Here we go. Pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. Okay, again, pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. An interesting list. There are definitely some overlaps when we speak, when we look at this from the Jewish perspective, which we're going to do today. And today we're going to, of course, as you can probably tell by the title that I sent out in the email, the goal is not just to explore the 7 deadly sins, but to explore what the 8th deadly sin is in Judaism. And the 8th deadly sin is more deadly than them all. I don't know if that's a good phrase, more deadly, maybe deadlier. I don't know. We'll have to get our grammar experts on that one. Okay, but let's explore what the 7 deadly sins might be from the perspective of Judaism. So before we continue, I want to make sure that everyone so far, I don't know if you guys can see everybody in the Brady Bunch view, but there's a way to actually do a thumbs up or an emoji or some sort of like reaction, which you can feel free to do. But we also like the actual manual thumbs up as well. Okay, so one way to explore 7 deadly sins in Judaism is by looking at the Sfirot. It's by looking at the divine emanations that are part and parcel of the fabric of existence, as well as the powers that govern and drive the human soul. I'm sure I don't need to make this introduction again to this group, because this group is a group of bona fide Kabbalists, right? Y'all have studied Kabbalah for many hours, and I know that we've studied Kabbalah together. So I know that there are 10 forces that God emanates in order to create the universe, and these 10 forces are also found in the soul of mankind, in the soul of human beings. Which is why when the Torah says, when the Bible says, let us make man in our image, so Kabbalah explains that the image and likeness is referring not to God's essence, but rather to God's emanations, which are plural. There are 10 of them, which kind of also explains why God says, let us make man after our image, or in our image, in our likeness. The plurals exist in the DNA of the universe, and they also exist in the DNA and the soul print of human beings. They are Chachma, Bina, Dat, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. 3 intellectual powers. You see, for such an experienced group, I don't even need to translate it, right? So we have 3 intellectual powers, 7 emotional powers, and the way Kabbalah describes it is that each of these powers, certainly when it comes to the emotional powers, each of them can be used or channeled in a healthy way or in an unhealthy way. So you can have, let's talk about chesed, which is loving kindness. It's love that manifests as kindness. So you can have healthy chesed and you can have unhealthy chesed. You can have a healthy form of love and kindness, and you can have an unhealthy form of love and kindness. I can love you, or I can love your stuff and want it for myself. That latter would be the unhealthy form, just by the way, just to clarify. Right? I can love you, which, again, the healthy form of love is that I wish to give to you. It's I love inside myself to outside. Or I can have it manifest in unhealthy love. Unhealthy love is where I look at you and I love what you have, or maybe I love who you are, but instead of wanting to honor that, instead of wanting to give and to help, I instead want to take. We've discussed this many, many times, the notion of unhealthy love. Unhealthy love means that instead of giving, I'm seeking to take, and I'm calling it love. What I'm saying is, I love you, but what it really means is, I'm in it for myself. I want to see what I can get out of it, what you can give to me. And as long as you're giving to me, then I love you. But if I'm not getting, then why should I give? Then what am I giving for? Right? It's like a person might say, I've been in this relationship for X amount of time, and what did I get out of it? And the question, although that might be a valid question on one level, on another level, really the question is not what I get out of a relationship, but what I give into the relationship, right? The question is not, the first question is not, what am I getting out of this relationship, but it's what am I putting into the relationship? What am I giving to the other party? So again, if we want to understand what the seven, just to explain where we're going with this and what you wrote are within the human deadly sins. So, what is chesed distorted? What is love distorted? It looks like seeking one's own benefit from the other. It could also manifest as envy. I look at someone and instead of being happy for them and wanting to give them and wanting to be there for them, again, I want to take from them, which is a form of envy. It's a form of jealousy. I want what they have. And that, of course, is not a healthy place to be. So that's all chesed. If we move on to the next soul power, the next emotional soul power, we have gevura. So there's chesed, and then we have gevura. What is gevura? Gevura is translated literally as strength, but understood in Kabbalah, it means discipline. It means judgment. It means discerning. It means boundaries. It means withholding. So whereas chesed is giving, gevura is withholding. So if you want to kind of picture this with just a hand, chesed would be an open hand, giving, and gevura would be a clenched fist, withholding, or a clenched hand that is withholding, that is not giving. So gevura is the boundary to chesed. Chesed says give, and gevura says stop. And like we've explained many times in these classes, gevura is a necessary balance to chesed. Gevura is the balance to chesed that makes chesed work effectively, efficiently, and in its intended way. To explain what I mean by that, so the example that I usually like to give is a waiter pouring water or wine at a meal. You're at a restaurant and the waiter is pouring you a beverage, and at some point the waiter stops pouring. It's not because the waiter doesn't like you. It's because your glass is full. And if the waiter keeps on pouring, then it's going to go all over you and all over the table, and it's going to make a big mess. So that stopping to pour is gevura. Chesed is unmitigated giving, or in its distorted form, unmitigated taking or seeking from the other person, right? That's the distorted form of chesed. But gevura is not chesed. Gevura is not giving. Gevura is withholding. Gevura is stopping to give. And why do I stop to give? Oh, and by the way, one more thing. Another example of gevura is teaching. I know we have many educators on this call or in this class. And when it comes to education, it's not only knowing what to give, but it's also knowing what not to give. You have to know what the students won't be able to understand and edit that out of your class. Because if you try to teach that, it's going to go right over their heads and it's going to do more harm than good educationally. So when it comes to education, it's really important to not only teach and give, but also to withhold. It's also about not teaching and knowing when to pause and allow the information to set in. And so let me model that, because I feel like this has been a few minutes of chesed, of just giving. So let me check in with you guys. Make sense so far what I'm saying? Yes? Yes? Okay. Enough gevura. Let's keep on going.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so gevura is knowing when to stop. It's knowing when not to give. It's knowing when to withhold. It's creating boundaries in a relationship. It would be the idea of creating boundaries and guidelines in the relationship, understanding healthy boundaries, healthy borders, right? It's like a parent that gives a curfew to their child. Your child goes out at night, and the parent says, make sure to be home by, I don't know. What's the good curfew nowadays? I have no idea. I guess no one's going out anyway. So be home by now. Don't go out. But I don't know, 9, 10, 11, depending on the age, who knows, right? So that is an act of gevura. And by the way, it could be understood or interpreted by the other party as being a negative. Oh, that's hilarious. Sandy says, be back from the living room by midnight. Exactly. Yes. Right. Very good. So, so it can be interpreted by the recipient as something that comes from a place that's not love. It's like, how come you don't love me? How come you don't trust me? Why do you want me back by this time, etc.? Which I get, it's understandable why that's coming from that side. Even a student might feel the boundaries as being coming from a place of the lack of love, the opposite of love, or in our lives when we face gevura moments, right? Gevura moments where we don't feel God's chesed. I mean, let's just be very frank, right? Right. Let's say we feel we're going through a moment in life, and maybe we're all in this to a certain extent right now. We're going through moments in life in which we feel we're not feeling God's chesed love, God's obvious love. We're feeling the gevura, we're feeling maybe the withholding, and from our perspective, from the recipient's perspective, it can feel like, why does this one not like me? Right? The student can say, why is the teacher not giving me what I want, or why is the teacher not, giving me the full amount of wisdom? And the child might say, why do I have these rules that I have to abide by? And the person in the relation might say, why these boundaries? And between us and God, we might say, why is this happening to us? And that's understandable. From the perspective of the recipient, it feels harsh. It might feel harsh. From the perspective of the giver, though, it might be a necessary component to the chesed. Now, far be it from me to start explaining on a cosmic level, to start explaining on a divine level, why this, why that, why the other. That's not my role. God doesn't need any human being to be his defense attorney and justification of why harsh things, at least from our perspective, happen. But one truth in Kabbalah that we know is that sometimes when we view something as harsh, there's another way to look at it. There's another perspective, a divine perspective, that tells a completely different story. But again, far be it from me to therefore say that our pain is not real and that we shouldn't be. It's not my intention. My point is that gvura necessarily, although necessary, necessarily feels usually necessarily, I would say necessarily feels harsh to the other party, because it's not chesed, it's gvura, it's withholding, and that can feel harsh. That usually does feel harsh. But it's a necessary balance to chesed, and it's part of the chesed experience. Part of giving is withholding. A distorted form of gvura is anger and rage. A distorted form of gvura is anger and rage. Let me explain why. Gvura is withholding. Withholding that comes from a place of judgment. I mentioned before that gvura is predicated on maybe I meant to mention this before. I don't know if I mentioned it clearly, but gvura is predicated on assessment. If you want to be an effective teacher, you have to assess the capacity of your student and teach accordingly. If you are a waiter, you have to assess the capacity of the cup and pour accordingly. If you are in a relationship, you have to assess the capacity of the other party, etc. So gevura is always based on assessment. We're assessing the other. We're assessing the keli, the receptacle, the vessel of the other, and we're giving accordingly. And when we assess that it's enough, we stop. That's what gevura is. Gevura is withholding based on assessment. Chesed is not interested in assessments. Assessments are made for... Who does assessments? The polls. What are the big polling? I don't know. Who are the big polling companies? Unmute yourself if you know. I'm going.
Pew and Gallup.
Pew and Gallup. Thank you. Yeah, that assessments are for Pew and Gallup says chesed. Chesed says I'm giving. It doesn't matter who I'm giving to. It doesn't matter what I'm giving. I'm giving. I'm generous. I'm giving. Unmitigated giving. Giving. Gevura says, no, you got to look at the recipient. What do you mean? You got to look and see. Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? How much is healthy? Gevura is very much discerning. Gevura is a critical look. Gevura is a magnifying glass. And that's why gevura could lead to anger. Because when you look too closely, or when you look very closely, you might find things that you don't like. And what happens when you don't like things? Oh, not only are you not giving, but now you're angry. It's like, what is this? I don't like this at all. So gevura can quickly devolve into distaste, dissatisfaction, and continue to devolve into anger and rage, right? Anger and rage is a gevura energy, a gevura gone rogue energy, but it's a gevura energy. It's a gevura energy that it starts with, maybe healthy assessment, but it quickly gets into a very, very judgy place. Right, we all know what it feels like to be judged. Yeah? Yes? Nod your head if you know what it feels like to be judged. But to be judged like very harshly. You may have had a boss that looked at your every move, that was critical of everything you said or did. And how did that make you feel? That didn't make you feel loved. You weren't feeling the chesed in that moment. And by the way, they might have said, no. Or coaches in sports. Think of a Steve Jobs. What, you think he was a chesed type of guy? Yeah, it's fine the way it is. It's okay. If it works, it can make phone calls. Let's launch it. The iPhone, it's good to go. It's good enough. You think that's what he was like? Or was he looking at every single... I'm just telling you what gevura looks like. Gevura is very discerning. Gevura is very discerning. It's disciplined. It's judgy. It's discerning. It's magnifying glass, it's fine-tooth comb, it's looking at every detail, and it's brutal, and it can lead to anger. It's a very short hop from judgment, loving judgment, to anger and rage. It's a very, very short hop. It's not even a hop. It's like in London, mind the gap. It's a very small step into that subway car, that tube, train, car, whatever they call it over there. I'm just hearkening back to my yeshiva days in London. I was in yeshiva in London for a year, so anyway, just thinking about that this morning. The point is that it's a very quick jump when a person is exercising their gevura, when a person is more of a gevura personality, it's very easy for that person to get to a place of dissatisfaction and anger. If you're not looking at the details, if you're glossing over the fine points, it's easy, everything's good. You love everything. You get it's good, let's keep on rolling. When you start examining the details, oh boy, the next thing you know, next train to dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is a short hop to voicing that and getting angry, getting upset about that, and then getting out of control. So anger and rage is a very, very unhealthy form, distorted form of gevura. Susan, question.
Hi.
Hey.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Sure.
When you're describing those qualities of Steve Jobs, I think of that as being that ambition. So that would be like a Netza quality. If you would just distinguish, and I know maybe you'll get to it, sort of that discernment versus ambitious, those different qualities.
Yeah, good question. So what Susan is asking is let's say somebody is very ambitious, and because they're ambitious, part of that drives them to perfection, or that's part of, let's say, their ambition is perfectionism, and because of that, they get very upset if it's not exactly right, but it's part of their ambition. So is that a gevura, detail-oriented analysis thing, or is that a netzach ambition thing? And so, in the immortal words of somebody, I'm sure, who once said this, why can't it be both? Yeah, why can't it be both? It might be a little bit of gevura involved in that experience. Look, when we're talking not about the original soul powers, but the distortion, I would say in most cases the distortion is coming from kind of a conglomerate of the soul powers, a few of them tag teaming to kind of distort it and mess things up. So it may not be one pure, energy that's being distorted, alone. Although maybe it's predominantly that, but it might be a kind of an amalgam of a few forces together. So you might have. Oh, and by the way, the other piece of it is human beings are very complex and very complicated, and we do have very complex emotions. And at any given time, we might be feeling something, and it might be one feeling, but it's not just one feeling. It's kind of like a few different feelings that are working together to produce this feeling that we have. So it's not like it might not be a pure, singular feeling. It could be a feeling, an emotion that rises from a few different angles. So a person might be upset, and it might be because of gevura and netzach. It's not, I'm using it as a verb, and I'm also netzaching it because I'm very ambitious about it, and it's not working out the way I like it, and therefore a person may not just be gevura oriented, it might be also gevura and netzach together. So let's talk about, but that's primarily, I would say primarily gevura can lead to anger. So chesed can lead to jealousy or envy. Let's use envy. So chesed can lead to envy because chesed is usually about giving, but giving is a short hop from taking, right? When I see what I'm giving, I might also see what I want to take from the other. So that could be the envy piece of it. That's chesed. Gvura can be, the distorted form of gvura can be anger. And let's talk now about the next piece of it. So chesed.
Rabbi?
Yes, Sandy.
I have another question.
Sure.
Is the assumption from a Kabbalistic interpretation that the soul powers that we begin with are these sort of pure positive?
Yes.
And that I was kind of thinking of it, not trying to oversimplify it, as kind of the nature nurture, is that when the soul is then in in life, in the environment, and so on, and there are all these conflicting things, that's when it brings forth these other qualities.
Yes.
So
Yes. 100, 1,000, I don't know if that makes sense, percent. Absolutely. We start off with a pure template, and then things kind of get a little bit wonky from there, for lack of a better term. Things get, and that's a product of nature and nurture. In other words, some people are predisposed on a certain level to certain challenges in certain areas. And when I say certain challenges, what I mean is, some people naturally have an over eager chesed or over eager gvura, and that might, because although everyone has these 10 soul powers, everyone has them to slightly different mixtures or compositions. The example that I've used before in many classes is the notion of colors. When you think of creating colors, let's say in Photoshop, right? So you're in Photoshop. Has anyone used Photoshop here? Yes, ish. Okay, yeah. So you can tune your colors. You amp up, or any photo editing software, even something on the phone. You can highlight. You can bring out warmer tones, cooler tones. You can adjust the reds, the yellows, the blues, the greens, whatever. You adjust it. Everything has every color has a different temperature. Light bulbs, right? Even maybe give a more simple example. Light bulbs come in warm and cool tones, right? It's based on the the frequency or something, right? You have 2,700 something, whatever that comes after that, bulbs are, I believe, warm. But once you get into the higher numbers, it's cooler. Am I wrong here? Am I right? Can anybody corroborate? Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. Or you can get, the bulbs that you can adjust with an app. Right? You get the Philips Hue bulbs or other bulbs where you can just easily, just tune the temperature with your finger, make it warmer or cooler as you wish. Or you can have it set that during this time of day it's warmer and this time of day it's cooler. So what's the point? I don't know. Let's talk about light bulbs. No, what's the point? The point is that every soul, although every soul has all 10 soul powers, every soul has a different blend of the soul powers. In other words, some are stronger chesed and some are stronger gvura. Look, you don't need me to tell you this. We all know, right? We know people and we know ourselves. Some people are more chesed oriented, they're more givers, and some people are more the different personality. But we all begin in a healthy way. But we have, predispositions, a little bit more this, a little bit less that. Based on that, plus environment, plus education, plus experience, plus any one of many, many factors, all of that can conspire to help a person, plus free choice, can lead to where a person chooses to manifest a distorted version, a distorted form of the soul power. So again, the short answer to your question, Sandy, is yes. We begin with a pure template, and on top of that pure template, we might layer something that is not so pure, something that's a little bit negative. We can distort what God has given us. By the way, you should know, I mentioned this. I did a live stream class for JLI, the International Jewish Learning Institute. It aired last week. Who knows? It's been a few weeks, but it aired last week at some point. It's still online. You can find it there. I spoke about the Sefirot, the 10 powers of the soul, the 10 energies of the universe, and one point I mentioned there in the introduction is that unlike other forms of therapy, let's say, Kabbalah works from the inside out, not from the outside in. It's not looking at what's the problem and then trying to fix it. Kabbalah says, let's look at a healthy template of what a human being looks like. Let's present the 10 soul powers. This is what a human being looks like in the purest, most healthy fashion. And then, how do we get back to that place of purity? right? It's not like, okay, what's broken, and then how are we band-aiding, what's the problem? That's not the way Kabbalah and Hasidus approaches this. The approach is not from the outside in, but rather from the inside out, right? What's the pure template? What does it look like in a healthy form? And then how do we live with more alignment to the pure template and get away from the other stuff? But it's not a focus so much on the negative as it is on the positive. So yeah, absolutely. The 10 soul powers in their original form are pristine and pure, and the goal is, so we have two deadly sins, which is now envy and anger, envy and rage, envy and wrath, and the third is Tiferet. The third energy of the soul is Tiferet, which means either beauty, harmony, or, as is typically understood in an emotional level, compassion. What is compassion? Compassion is a blend, a hybrid of Gevura and Chesed, where Gevura has the discernment, but Chesed has the giving. So Tiferet is the discernment of Gevura, but the giving of Chesed, which means I look at the other person and I'm judging. I am judging. I'm not just giving, open, pure, free love. I'm discerning. There's Gevura involved. But because I'm discerning, because I'm looking, and because I'm judging, and I'm judging the other one to be, let's say, inferior, I'm therefore going to give. What is compassion? Compassion is feeling bad. Well, this is sympathy, right? Feeling bad for the other, which is a product of judging them. I don't feel sympathy if I'm not judging. Right? So I'm judging, but instead of judging and then saying, well, I'm not giving, Tiferet is judging and then giving because of that. Because I feel bad, because I'm sympathetic, or on a deeper level, empathetic, I'm judging so I feel the other's pain, therefore Chesed I'm giving. So it's a hybrid of Gevura and Chesed is Tiferet. Hope that makes sense. So that's what compassion is. Compassion is judging and then giving. But the distorted form of Tiferet is enabling or codependency, where a person is giving to the other and not helping them, but keeping them in a negative state. Codependency is one distorted form of chesed, of Tiferet, of compassion. Compassion is a good thing. But if I'm constantly, let's say they're not in a good place, but instead of helping them out of it, I'm just giving, and not helping them actually climb out of it. So that's what we call enabling, or it's being in a state of, it's a codependent relationship where I almost need to have someone that's needy to give to in order to make me feel something, accomplished or good about myself. So Tiferet is wonderful, compassion is wonderful, but not when it becomes something that I need and I need someone else. Like if a person, the example that I'm thinking, and you all know my interpretation of The Giving Tree, the book by Shel Silverstein. I think you all know my interpretation of The Giving Tree. The Giving Tree is at the same time a wonderful book and a very disturbing book. It's beloved by adults and kids, but also when you and if you really think about it, and I've given classes on this before, if you really think about it, it's straight up a codependent relationship. The tree almost needs for the boy to need it. And if the boy doesn't need the tree is sad. The tree, if you look throughout the book, and I challenge you, this is the Giving Tree Challenge. I'm kidding, it's not, but it could be. Is crack open a copy. I can't even tell right now if you're opening up another tab and quickly perusing the Giving Tree on another tab, and that's fine. Maybe. No, anyway, but the point, look through the book, and you'll see the happiness of the tree in the book The Giving Tree is directly correlated directly a result of the tree's giving to the boy. And many of you have heard me say this many times before, the boy never becomes an adult in the tree's eye. From the tree's perspective, it's always a boy. The character is a Zayda. I don't know if it actually has grandkids or not. Sorry, spoiler alert, that's how the book ends. But the tree needs to give. It doesn't need for the boy to become an adult, to become a man that's self-sufficient. It needs to keep the boy in a state of need and dependency. And the more that the boy is dependent on it, the better it feels. When the boy needs it, it's happy. Its greatest thrill is giving. The only time in the book that the tree is not happy, and by the way, you never hear about the boy's happiness. It's only, and the tree was happy. The tree's happiness. No mention of the boy goes from a happy kid to a miserable adult. But the tree's happy. As long as the tree is giving, the tree is happy. That's what the tree needs. The tree's getting what it needs. The only time the book says that the tree wasn't so happy, I think the book says, I'm quoting this by memory, it says, and the tree was happy, but not really. I think it says but not really. Some sort of caveat. The only time it says that is the point in the story where the tree says, cut down my entire trunk. And the implication is because at this point the tree feels like it won't have anything else to give. And if it can no longer give, so then it doesn't have anything left. David, is that the giving tree in your background? Amazing. Look at that. Love that. Fantastic. Good. So that's an example of Tiferet gone wrong. Tiferet is beautiful. Tiferet, look at this. Look at this. One of the advantages of doing a class at home. Shalom, I love that picture. Okay, so Shel Silverstein, what an amazing person. Very, very deep. This is not a kid's book. I mean, it has illustrations, but it's not a kid's book. You guys see that? Ish. But the boy stayed away for a long time, and when he came back, the tree was so happy she could hardly speak. Come, boy, she whispered, come and play. I'm too old and sad to play, said the boy. Oh, we do hear about the boy's emotion. He's not happy. He's still a boy, though, right? To the tree, he's still a boy. He's always a boy. Okay. I want a boat that will take me far away from here. Can you give me a boat? You know when somebody wants to get far away, it's usually because they're not happy? Okay, that's what's going on here. Cut down my trunk and make a boat, said the tree, and then you can sail away and be happy. And so the boy cut down her trunk and made a boat and sailed away. No more tree. And the tree was happy, but not really. But not really. Why? Again, understood through this lens, because in this codependent relationship, the tree feels like maybe it can no longer fill that role of rescuer. It can no longer save the day. Without a trunk, without any... Until at the end, of course, this is the most telling illustration in the entire book. And the tree was happy. That's the last lines in the book is, and the tree was happy. But look at the illustration next to it. How happy is that picture? The end. The tree might be happy. The man is miserable. Yeah? Okay, so what's the point? Tiferet. Let's get back to Tiferet. So Tiferet is codependency and enabling in a negative way. In a positive way, it's giving. It's compassion. It's seeing a need and filling that need. The highest form of tzedakah is helping a person not become needy. It's not keeping a person in a state of need. It's helping a person rise out of that need so they're no longer a recipient, but rather they become themselves a giver. The greatest form of tzedakah, which would be associated with tiferet, compassion, the greatest form of tzedakah is helping a person stand on their own 2 feet. The greatest form, the greatest success in education is not creating students that need a teacher. It's creating people that know how to learn on their own, know how to think on their own, and are wise individuals who can then in turn teach others. That is the goal. As Adam writes to me in the chat, teaching someone how to fish rather than giving them fish. Exactly. Or teaching someone how to make a living as opposed to telling them, take my apples, cut down my branches, cut down my trunk, right? And that's going to be the key to your happiness. That's not the way. So, Tiferet in its pure form is extremely holy. In its non-pure form, it can be extremely devastating. Let's move on. We've covered 3 out of 7. Let's move on to number 4, which is Netzach. Sandy writes to me, greatest leaders are the ones who walk beside and then step away so others can lead. Exactly. Or as I like to say, a good shadchan, a good matchmaker, right? Shadchan is someone who puts 2 people together and then gets out of the way. You don't want your shadchan in the back seat of the car. I'm just on a date. That's not the role of a man, right? If the shadchan is always around, that doesn't constitute a healthy relationship. Okay, so getting back to the soul powers. Soul power number 4 is Netzach. We spoke about Netzach before very briefly. Netzach is ambition. Netzach is drive, ambition, tenacity, perseverance. Netzach means victory. It means overcoming obstacles. It's staring. Netzach is. But Netzach can also end up looking like greed, looking like a person who will stop at nothing to achieve what they want. This is not envy. This is straight up greed. This is a person straight up wants and wants and wants and wants and is not going to stop until they get exactly what they want. And this can be extremely ugly. This can lead to extremely devastating actions and devastating consequences. I don't think I need to give examples of this. We all have seen countless examples in our lives. Trampling others, destroying others, swallowing others whole. That is one of the most devastating traits that a person can have. So I don't think it needs much elaboration. So that is number 4. Again, the healthy form of Netzach is, let's say you make a resolution. Let's say you resolve every single day to study Torah at this time and at that time and at that time. Let's say you have 3 study sessions. So Netzach, healthy Netzach is, even though I'm tired, even though I'm busy, even though something else came up, I made a commitment, I'm going to study Torah. Netzach is, during the time of prayer, to stay focused on speaking to God and not be distracted by all the other stuff. All the other stuff can wait till after I finish my prayers. But right now I'm communicating with God. It's my chance. It's my moments throughout the day, 3 times a day. It's my moments to communicate with God. I'm not going to let other things get in the way. I'm going to be single-mindedly focused on doing what I need to do, on serving God, on worshiping God, on praying to God, on doing this mitzvah, helping this person, whatever it is. I'm focused. We had the Torah portion yesterday was Shmini. And at the end of Shmini, it talks about kosher. What constitutes a kosher fish and a non-kosher fish? Right? What makes a fish kosher? Two things. Fins and scales. If it has fins and scales, it's kosher. If it has only one, not the other, it's not kosher. Says the Talmud, any fish that has fins has scales. Sorry, any fish that has scales has fins. But not every fish that has fins has scales. And the mystics explain that fins represents ambition, netzach, and scales represent integrity. You have many people that have fins but no scales. There are people that have fins. We explore short themes from the Torah portion at noon every single day, high noon. So you're free to join. I mentioned this insight on Friday. So fins is ambition. Scales is integrity. To be a kosher fish, and who doesn't want to be a kosher fish, right? To be a gefilte, you have to have both signs. You have to have ambition checked by integrity. Don't compromise your values. Don't compromise others' the value of others. Don't step on other people. Don't engage in unkosher behavior, whatever that means, in the pursuit of your ambition, in the pursuit of your fins. Don't let your fins slay your scales. If you have scales, then you'll get where you want to go. If you have scales, you'll have fins. But if you have fins, you might not always have scales. The point is like this. Netzach is fins, and fins are wonderful to have. And fins can lead to the greatest accomplishments, but also can lead to greed, and it can lead to the greatest vices of human beings. All right, let's move on to Hod. Number 5. 5 out of 7. These are, again, the deadly sins, the Jewish deadly sins, as defined by the Sfirot. Look at the 7 emotional Sfirot. Look at their healthy forms and their unhealthy counterparts. Now we have the deadly sins. So, number 5 is Hod. What is Hod? Hod is humility. Hod is yielding. Whereas Netzach is ambition and drive forward, Hod is putting on the brakes, stepping back. It's yielding to another. It's yielding to something else. On a highway, Netzach is coming off the on-ramp, is driving on the on-ramp and gunning it onto the highway and not looking. And Hod is waiting your turn. The problem is, that's the healthy form. It's good to wait. In a conversation, it's good to wait. Allow the other person to speak. I know I'm not being a good example. I'm not being a good role model of Hod today. But by the way, I should say, if anybody has anything to say, feel free to jump in. All right, back to me. I'm kidding. No, really, honestly, jump in. Questions at any time. Unmute yourself and ask. Hod is yielding. Hod is pausing. Hod is listening. Hod is waiting. A distorted form of Hod is, laziness. Using the language of the other 7 deadly sins, we would call it sloth. Sloth? It's a great word. What's the definition of sloth? Let's pull it up here. I usually ask y'all to define things, but now again, I just a simple sloth. Oh, sloth is a slow-moving mammal that hang upside down on the trees of tropical rainforests in South America and Central America. The more you know. Okay, great. So I guess we've named this quality after this upside down tree hanging South and Central America mammal, the sloth. And the sloth refers to the quality of not moving so quickly. Not physically, but also physically. But it's basically, putting the brakes on so much that we're not motivated. It's a lack of motivation. And that's great, David. Man, this is awesome. Just take a look at David's background, and we see the sloth right there. Loving that. Loving it. I feel like we should slow down this class because we're moving very quickly through this. I'm kidding. Sloth is, a positive form of sloth is, it's great, it's courteous. It's a, Is that Joy? Is that you holding a sloth? Wow, that's amazing. Look at that.
And it's a baby sloth on the sloth.
A baby sloth. I bet they move even slower. Or maybe not. Maybe they're excited about life. Oh, hey Shaya. Come on in, bud.
What's up, Shaya?
Hey, it's Shaya. Say hi.
Hi.
Okay, I mean, you don't have to. I mean, it's just only if you want to, buddy. All right. So, yeah, a sloth. Oh, you wanted to see the sloth? Come, check out the sloth. Hey, Joy, can you hold up the picture again? We have two sloths. David has a sloth in his background, and that's Joy holding a baby sloth. Joy, where were you when you were holding the baby sloth?
I was in Colombia, but
Wow.
that's the mama. The big one is the mother, but there's a little baby one in the front. See the baby in the pouch?
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I see two. I see two sloths. Yeah, that's awesome. That's not a sloth. All right, cool. So, who thought we were gonna have like Discovery Channel here at Kabbalah Coffee? This is fantastic. This is Kabbalah and Colombia. So what we have is a quality that is tremendously powerful. It's so good to be courteous to someone else. It's so good to listen. It's so good to pause and to wait your turn. But if a person is always pausing, and a person is never moving, is never striving and accomplishing, a person's always on in a holding pattern, that's not good either. That is also a deadly sin. So that sloth, that kind of laziness sounds judgy. I don't like that word laziness because it sounds a little bit too judgy. But the sloth kind of, moving at a snail's pace, not really, accomplishing. That's not healthy. Let's move on. Number 6.
Can I interject something?
Yeah,
Rabbi?
for sure.
Okay, sometimes I think of Hod as being kind of like tradition, and then Netzah being changing, and I think of them, like in the political forms, like the Netzah being kind of the left, wanting change, and Hod being kind of the right or conservatives, in the sense of wanting things to kind of stay the same and have tradition.
It's interesting take. So the ambition is to change. So Netzach is about change, reform, changing
Change,
something.
Reform, yeah.
And Hod is about status quo. I like that. I think that's fair.
Or tradition, and kind of keeping things the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think that a health without this is not a political. It's not about politics or U.S. politics or anything. But it's in life. It's good to have a healthy balance of tradition and change, right? It's good to have a balance of kind of old world values married with new world, stuff.
And that would be ideal for politics, for those to marry into some.
And I think in Judaism you also have this. I mean, look, we're studying Kabbalah, wisdom that's literally thousands of years old, using Zoom. I mean, talk about leveraging new platforms, new technology, with old school teachings. I mean, and old school teachings, not to keep them in the old school, but to bring them to modern light. And that's really the whole purpose of what we do. I think my personal mission, I feel, is to bring the ancient teachings of Judaism into a modern world, into a modern society, and to modern thinking people, and to allow that to grow. The word for Jewish law, it's very interesting. The word for Jewish law, as many of you know, is halacha. And halacha means actually movement. As rigid as the law might seem to be, the law is the law, right? But the actual word for law in Judaism is movement. Why? Not that we're changing the law. Because if you change the law, then what do you have? If you keep on changing the target, then we're not aiming toward. So it's not about changing the law, but it's about the law kind of growing and evolving with us. Again, not changing it, but that it adapts, or it's relevant in any situation. So no matter what comes up, no matter Torah, Kabbalah will have something to say about it. Absolutely, without a doubt. Self-driving cars. How to program the ethics of programming self-driving cars. Genetic cloning organs. Talking about bleeding edge uterine transplants. All of these have sources and have teachings in Judaism that are relevant to that topic. So, by the way, in the last case that I just gave, the last example that I just gave, the question would be, who's the mother? Right? Halachically, according to Jewish law, who's the mother? The donor or the recipient? Right? Is it ethical for a mother to donate, do a uterine transplant to a daughter? These are some of the questions. Several years ago, when this medical procedure was in its infancy, no pun intended, before it actually was effective in enabling a woman to give birth who wasn't able to give birth otherwise. And I'm just giving this example to say that sometimes we look at tradition as being archaic, right? The Hod is outdated and the Netzach is where it's at. But what Susan is saying is actually accurate. It's about marrying the Netzach and the Hod together. That's where the magic happens. Netzach and Hod, each one on its own, might not be great. Netzach on its own, if a young generation thinks that there's nothing that the older generation can teach it, they're headed off a cliff. And that's just it, right? I mean, if the youth, if the young don't turn to those that have come before them, they're just destined to make the same mistakes, and their ambition can straight up head off a cliff into disaster. At the same time, you need young blood, so you really need both tradition and some new excitement. Let's talk about number 6, Yesod. Now, Yesod is connected with connectedness, and have some of you seen the sfirot, or the powers of the soul, depicted on the human form, on like the outline of a human body? Yesod would be corresponding to the more intimate places of the human being, of the human body. Because Yesod is symbolic of connection and deep connection. And therefore, now we can understand certainly the tremendous positive form of Yesod, and at the same time there can be a tremendously distorted form of Yesod, a negative form of Yesod, which we can simply call lust, inappropriate desire, inappropriate intimate desires, etc. I'm not gonna elaborate on that, but the point is we can all I think we all know what I'm talking about, and for every situation it's a little bit different. But the point is that in general, Yesod is healthy connection, healthy intimacy, and Yesod distorted is unhealthy forms of intimacy. Intimacy, let's maybe couch it in these terms: acts of intimacy devoid of actual intimacy. That might be one form of it. And there could be many other forms of distortion when it comes to Yesod. But that we might generally refer to under the umbrella of lust. I don't want to elaborate too much on that because it's because I'm in my dining room right now, and for other reasons. And the seventh and final of the emotional soul powers. And Malchut corresponds to, or Malchut means leadership. Malchut means leadership, kingship, sovereignty. It means a real leader. A real leader, someone who is exalted, and leading and lifting others up. We spoke a little bit about the notion of lifting others up in the context of Tiferet, compassion, but there it's more of like bending down to help someone out and then ultimately lifting them up. Malchut is kind of leading from a position of exaltedness. Malchut is a very, very powerful thing, but Malchut can also have a distorted form, which is pride or pride or lust for power. Right? We just spoke about ambition. Is that also netzach? Yeah, somewhat ambition also, but this is specifically the drive for power and lording over, lordship, if you will, lording over others, being on top of others, being greater than others, manipulating others just for the sake of feeling that power. It's a very destructive form of distortion. This malchut gone rogue. Okay, let me just check the chat. Okay, 1 second. Okay, Joy is writing, sloth means indifference to work which gives rise to that's back to sloth. Hod. Right, sloth is indifference to work which gives rise to self-centeredness. Yeah. So sloth could also be, I'm not interested in doing anything because I just want to be comfortable and sit around. Right, yeah, so it could also be somewhat ego-driven. But anyway, back to Malchut. Malchut is this notion of, in a healthy way, of really having something to give and giving through leadership. In a distorted way, Malchut is the notion of seeking and lusting after power and wanting others to be beneath you so that you can feel in charge. We know what that looks like. We know that there are countless examples in our lives, and maybe we've even been in that position where we were given a little bit of power and it went to our heads. That's ultimately what Malchut's distortion looks like. So I don't know, or Kabbalistic deadly sins based on the inverse of the 7 midot, of the 7 soul character traits, emotional character traits, and they are, in order: envy, anger or rage, enabling or codependency, greed, sloth, lust, and pride or power. Again, I'll just give one for each. Envy, anger, enabling, greed, sloth, lust, and pride. Those are 7 deadly sins based on the 7 midot, the 7 character traits of a human being. Again, of these 7 take the form of these 7 distortions. Okay, but now we talk about number 8, because as our chapter number 17, as our chapter teaches, the chapter of our text that we're studying, there is a negative trait that transcends them all, that is worse than them all, and that is more destructive than them all. And that is the notion of sinat chinam, which is baseless hatred. It's ego or clashing. Ego-driven hatred, ego-driven division, we say in our text, that began our discussion in this discourse in the first place. So, without further ado, I will pull up the text and of our discourse, and we're going to jump in. So while I do that, I'm going to take a quick break. Let's give it 90 seconds while I pull this up, and you can feel free to unmute yourself. First of all, you can feel free to walk around, stretch your legs for a minute, and ask any questions that you have, or add any comments that you wish on what we explained so far. Jump in, please. Not all at once. I'm practicing my Hod, so feel free to fire away. Does everything make sense so far? Okay. I'm getting thumbs up on this side. All right. Listen. If there are no comments, let's continue. I'm going to share my screen. And we're off to the races. Okay, you should be able to see my screen now. We're on page 33 of our text, chapter 17. You guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Fantastic. So in our text, we are looking at a verse in Numbers, in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, chapter 31, where it talks about a war that the Jewish people were to fight and wage against a nation called Midian. You can see the spelling of Midian right at the top of your screen. And wage war against Midian. And that's the verse that we began our discourse with. And we analyzed it. We asked a lot of questions. And at the core, we asked, what's this war against Midian all about? What is Midian? Not the ancient Midian. The ancient Midian was a nation that started up with the Jews. So the Jews were told, now it's time to fight back. But that's a very time-specific story. That's a story that happened 3,300 years ago that has nothing to do with today. So Kabbalah seeks to understand what are the permanent or the timeless messages of the story. What's the timeless meaning of waging war against Midian? What is Midian? What does it represent within us, for you and for me? And what does it mean to wage war against Midian? And what does it mean that Moses is specifically the one to gather together the army? We know about the dangers of baseless hatred. We're ready to jump into chapter 17. He says, thus, the klipa, the evil force of Midian, refers to strife and quarreling, divisiveness, fragmentation, and baseless hatred. So strife, quarreling, divisiveness, fragmentation, baseless hatred is all symbolic and emblematic of Midian. Midian is related to the words madon umeriva, which means strife and quarreling. Midian seeks to pull apart. Midian is the force inside of us that says, I can't stand that person, God forbid. I don't like them. I don't get along with them. Midian is the quality, the negative quality, within a person that drives us apart and seeks to drive others apart. It is thus, by the way, you might notice that I didn't mention number 8. This is why I call today's class 8 Deadly Sins. And if you want to know what number 8 is, I told you the other 7. Number 8, not, so what I'm looking for, diversity. Diversity is good. Diversity is wonderful. If you can put together a diverse group of individuals, that's a fantastic thing. But that's if you can put them together. But if you have diversity that devolves into strife and quarreling, and divisiveness, fragmentation, and baseless hatred, then it's no good. It is thus the antithesis. It is thus the antithesis and opponent to the name Havaya as a whole. Look at this. He says, this klipa of Midian, this force of strife within the human condition, is the exact opposite, stands opposed to God's name, the name Havaya, the holiest name of God, the 4-letter name of God. It is the antithesis and opponent to the name Havaya as a whole, which represents unity and synthesis. The name Havaya, God's name, represents unity and synthesis. Havaya is comprised of 4 letters, Yud and Hey and Vav and a second Hey, and those 4 letters symbolize all sorts of Kabbalistic mysteries and energy mysteries, but they're all about unity, because you have the energy of the Yud coupled with the energy of the Hey. Yud, for example, is Chesed, and Hey is Bina, and Vav are the first six middos, and the last unity. If you're getting along, it's holy, it's kadosh. If you're not getting along, it's klipa, it's sitra achra, it's evil, it's the other side. It's not holy. It's not holy. So, what stands opposite Midjan? What stands opposite Havaya? It's Midjan. Let's continue. The klipa of Midjan directly opposes this unity. Again, what is the spiritual energy force of Midjan? It's divisiveness. And that stands directly opposed to God's holy name Havaya. It opposes this unity and is therefore much worse. Look at this. Look at this line. It's therefore much worse than the klipa, the evil forces of the 7 Canaanite nations. There were 7 Canaanite nations that inhabited the land of Israel before the Jewish people conquered the land. And again, Kabbalah understands these as not being just literally nations, but 7 energies. And each of the 7 Canaanite nations represents one negative quality that you and I are meant to root out of ourselves and make holy. I'm going to say that one more time in a more hopefully clear fashion. The ancient call for the Jewish people to conquer the land of Canaan and transform it into the land of Israel is a timeless forms. Not that the negative forms are truly indigenous, i.e. that they're from, as we spoke about, they're not the original incarnations. The original incarnations are holy, but as we go through life, somehow these 7 Canaanite nations conquer the 7 traits, the 7 deadly sins that we spoke about, and transform them back to their holy forms. And he mentioned some of them: lust, anger, murder, pride, and so on. I didn't mention murder, but murder can certainly fit in to one of them. I'm getting asked on the chat, and it looks like maybe the settings are only set to private. I don't know why that's so, or if that's so. But anyway, it looks like, so I got a question in the chat from Joy. Where is Lashon Hara? Where is speaking ill of someone else? Well, that's an action. That's an action that someone takes to speak ill of someone. That could come from any one of the 7, or it could be a manifestation of number 8, which is baseless hatred. So it's hard to tell exactly where this is coming from. Speaking ill of someone else, is it from anger, gevura? Is it from netzach, ambition? Maybe it's from baseless hatred. Probably from baseless hatred, I would say. It might be from number 8. The point here is that we have 7 Canaanite nations that mirror the 7 evil character traits, which are the 7 distortions of the 7 holy character traits. And let's continue. Each one of these traits causes a blemish in only one particular letter of the name Havaya. So everything that we do, good or bad, has an effect. And the bad stuff, the bad traits, have a negative effect. And it says in Kabbalah, it causes a blemish in one of the letters of God's name. That's what it says. It causes a blemish in one of the letters of God's name. It has such an effect. Our actions, our behaviors, our character traits have such an effect, not only on ourselves and not only on those around us, but on a cosmic level and on a spiritual level. So our being has an effect on God's name, Havaya. Similarly, transgressing any one of the Torah's 365 prohibitions causes a blemish in only one particular level. So his point here is not that it causes damage or a blemish, but that it causes a blemish in only one level or in only one of the letters of God's name. In contrast, I'll give you an example. This is an example a metaphor used in the book of Tanya. Imagine a rope. Imagine a rope. A big, thick rope that's comprised of 613 strands. And every mitzvah, there's 613 commandments, some 248 positive, 365 negative, which totals 613. So imagine you have a rope, a very thick rope, comprised of 613 individual strands. When we compromise any of these mitzvot, we compromise one of the strands that we compromise. Every prohibition, for example, that we violate, every evil character trait that we possess, causes one blemish on one particular level. However, and here's the big reveal, in contrast, the klipa of Midyan, which is characterized by division and difference, causes a blemish in the name Havaya as a whole. Midyan, which we said is divisiveness, which we said is, I'm going to scroll back up, right? What is Midyan? Strife, quarreling, divisiveness, fragmentation, baseless hatred. Midyan is not just one negative quality or one negative violation. Midyan is the whole shebang. Midyan is the collective. Midyan is the source. Midyan is the klal from which the pratim emerge. It's the general from which the details emerge. Midyan is therefore worse than them all. Midyan is standing not opposite or blemishing not just one of the letters of God's name or one spiritual level as a compromising. No, it goes after the whole name of God. It goes after all the spiritual levels. Now, okay, so let me read the sentence. Let me highlight it so you know where I'm up to. You see that in contrast? Yeah? Is it highlighted in your okay, great. So in contrast, the klipa of Midyan, which is characterized by division and difference, causes a blemish not in just one letter, but in the name Havaya as a whole. Remember, Havaya is many different things, but it stands in general for unity. Midyan, which is the opposite of unity, opposes the whole thing. You have certain things that are, details. And then you have like the whole point. Like, there's certain things that you can compromise on. Let's say a vacation. I know vacations are out of the window, for right now because of, the social distancing and stay at home and quarantining and all that good stuff, all that necessary stuff. But here's the point. Let's say, I see the chat is lighting up. Let's see what's going on with the chat. Not only baseless hatred, but hatred in general. Okay, yeah. Adam is saying it's not only baseless hatred, but hatred. Yes, you're right, but in this text, we're calling all hatred baseless. That's the big reveal. All hatred, even the one that we have a good reason for, is ultimately baseless. That's the big point. The big point is, even when we rationalize our hatred, it really comes down to baseless. If you really think about it, it's all about ego, which really has no objective basis. That's the whole point of this text. The whole point of this text is to hold a mirror up to ourselves and to our hearts and to say, you know what, I have all these good excuses and all these good rationales and rationalizations for why I don't like that person. But you know what? It's all because of ego. It's all ultimately baseless hatred. But let me get back to what I was saying before. So we're talking about a vacation, and somebody might ask, what is, okay, so you find out that, okay, so you won't be able to do this on your vacation. All right, fine, we'll still be able to do all those other things. Well, no, you know what? Another aspect is taken away. You won't be able to do that in your vacation. Fine, I still have all these other things. But then it becomes a certain point in time where so many details are compromised that it's not worth it anymore. Right? If I can't do this, if this is closed, and that is closed, and that is closed, then what's the point of going? But then there's an even deeper way that you wouldn't go on the vacation. Like, for example, if the whole point of the vacation was to be with your significant other, and they're not going. right? Then there's no point. It's not about whether this museum is open or that museum is open. There's no point to go. I'm giving a weird example, but it's like there are details in our relationship with God or our relationship with ourselves and our character development, right? So there are details. And we might be good in some areas and maybe not so good in certain other areas. But then there's midya. And midya means we're not getting along with others, and that's the whole deal. That is diametrically opposed to the totality of God's name, of Havaya, the totality of holiness. It's not just one detail. It's not just one blemish. It's the whole thing. It's the whole thing is ruined. If we don't get along with each other, then we have nothing. Now, I love the parentheses and the brackets here. One should not, this is like a perfect disclaimer. I love this. One should not, however, lightly dismiss the possibility of general damage through a specific sin. In other words, okay, we just said that specific sins, yeah, one detail, one strand, one level, no big deal. But baseless hatred, that's huge. Now he says, okay, 1 second. Let's not minimize, right, the negative effect of even one thing. Like, it's not a free-for-all. He's not advocating, do whatever you want as long as you love everybody. Hold on, slow it down. He's saying, don't lightly dismiss the possibility of general damage to a specific sin. The verse, V'nokiv Shem Hashem, which is generally translated as, and he who blasphemes God's name, literally means, and he who perforates, i.e. pokes a hole in God's name, which means that each sin causes a particular blemish, a perforation, a hole, which in turn produces a general effect as well. For example, if one damages, or more precisely, perforates one of the 365 blood vessels, not blood vessels, I don't know why it's translated as blood vessels, veins or arteries. In the Hebrew, it's veins or arteries. Imagine you have a vein or artery, so if you perforate, if you make a hole in one vein or artery, and blood comes out, it could be very dangerous, right? So to the point of drawing blood, one weakens the body in general, right? A person can, God forbid, bleed out. Now, it's not the same as, let's say, the jugular, right? That's a more severe loss of blood, but any individual place where a person gets cut and now blood is coming out, it causes damage. So we shouldn't make light of the specific individual sins and indiscretions, but it's not on the same level. Nevertheless, these individual sins directly affect only a particular aspect, while baseless hatred affects the name Havaya as a whole. Okay, so his point is like this. His point still stands that we have individual sins, like the 7 nations of Canaan, that are symbolic of 7 individual negative character traits, and then you have midyan, which is the baseless hatred, which is the eighth deadly sin, which is greater than them all and more collective, and it's bigger and it's badder, and it has a more severe effect not only on ourselves and others, but also on the cosmic level as well. It affects God's name as a whole. It affects everything. Now, let's continue. I know we're a little bit past the time, but I want to do one more paragraph, and then we're going to stop. It is therefore much more difficult to correct. Based on its severity is the difficulty in correction. It is therefore much more difficult to correct the klipa of midyan than the klipa of the other 7 negative character traits, even though they involve actual transgressions of the Torah's commandments. In other words, the other 7 character traits might lead to actual Torah transgressions. He says that's still easier to fix than the 8th, which is baseless hatred, which we don't find a specific prohibition in Torah against not hating the other person. Thus, and this is a huge point, this is a massive, massive point. Thus, the first exile, what he means is the exile that followed the destruction of the first holy temple in Jerusalem. The first exile which resulted from the transgression of severe sins, idolatry, adultery, and murder, lasted only 70 years. The Talmud in Tractate, I have it open in front of me, the Talmud in Tractate Yuma says, page 9b, says that the first temple was destroyed because of 3 sins: idolatry, adultery, and murder. And he says they were severe sins, obviously, very severe sins, and the temple was destroyed and taken away from us but it only lasted 70 years. After 70 years, God gave us a second temple. During those 70 years, the blemishes, and back inside, during those 70 years, the blemishes caused by those sins were corrected. And then we had a second temple. The second temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 69. And we're still in that exile today. The present exile, as is known, was caused by the sin of baseless hatred. The Talmud says that as well, the same tractate. As the Talmud states, the second sanctuary was destroyed because of baseless hatred. And this bitter exile has lasted over 1,800 years. At this point, it's over 1,900 years. Close to 2,000 years. Look, we're in year 2020 and it happened in the year 69. So close to 2,000 years of exile, all for the blemish, all because of baseless hatred. Why? For the blemish which caused it was all pervasive. This is his, I'm not going to say his final, like proof, but it's very compelling. It's very, very compelling. The Talmud says the first temple was destroyed because of the three cardinal sins: idolatry, adultery, and murder. And yet, notwithstanding the severity of those indiscretions and the severity of those sins, despite all of that, it only lasted 70 years. Our exile, the one that we're in right now, is almost 2,000 years. And what was its cause? Baseless hatred. This is his proof, or one of his, another indication of how severe the sin of baseless hatred is. And again, baseless hatred is synonymous with hatred. That's what it is. Because as we already established in the previous chapters, when a person has the justification for the hatred, it's usually because of ego, which means that it's baseless. If we had more humility, we would find a way to get along. If we can't stand, we can't get along, we can't fix it, it's usually because our ego is in the way. This is not a small problem, he says. This is the problem. This is the cardinal, I don't know if that's the right word, this is the biggie. This is the big character flaw. I don't know, flaw. This is the big indiscretion. This is the big thing that needs correction. This is the big battle of life. This is the battle against Midian. This is the ultimate battle. This is the one in Numbers chapter 31. Chapter 31 of the book of Numbers. It's the one that God tells Moses will be your final battle. This is it. This is the final battle, the final frontier, the top of the mountain. Can't stand. Our text is driven for one purpose and one purpose only. And that is, our text is driven by one goal, to wake us up how this is coming from a place of ego. And how all of the halos of justification we put around it, yeah, but they're wrong. Yeah, but they did X, Y, and Z. Yeah, but all of that are our justifications for something that is at its core opposite of the totality of holiness. Somebody wrote to me in a message, does this everything is good? There's a difference between hating someone's actions or finding someone's actions to be not good and hating the person. There's a difference. And I know that our minds, immediately when we hear this thing, our minds move to the extremes. Well, what do you mean? I shouldn't hate X, Y, and Z who did such horrific things everyday level, and an everyday basis, dealing with extremes. We're dealing with our family. We're dealing with our neighbors. We're dealing with our coworkers. Not, hopefully, evil people that have committed the most horrific atrocities that people have committed. If you're thinking, but what about those that have committed the atrocities? Again, that's the point is not the extremes. The point is the everyday relationships that we have. And the question is, are there relationships that are strained? Are there relationships? Do we find ourselves being judgy? Do we find ourselves experiencing in our own lives divisiveness? And we all do. The answer for all of us should be yes, if we're honest, because everyone has the klip of midjan. We have it inside of us. The great work. The great work. This is the work of a lifetime. This is Moses' final battle. This is the one that God says in chapter 31 of the book of Numbers, once you do this, that will be your final mission on earth. Then you will pass away. This is the final frontier. This is it. I mean, I'm not like end of days and dooms. I'm saying, but it's the highest mountain to climb. Getting to a place where we can tolerate and even love the other person, even though we might disagree with them, even though we don't see eye to eye, even though we don't think that everything they've ever done is so holy. Can you still get along with them? That's the question. We have so much resistance to this question, but we have so much resistance. But know this, that's what we're talking about. That's midjan. If there wasn't resistance, if it wasn't hard, then this text wouldn't have been written. And I wouldn't have chosen it to study. I chose this text to study because I believe that the great challenge of our generation is divisiveness. I believe this with every core of my being. That the big challenge of our generation is sinas chinam, is not getting along with others. And we justify it from today to tomorrow. We can write books of justification, and it may make perfect sense, and it's still not holy. Doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make it holy. Divisiveness is not holy. Figure out a way how to get along. But they don't want to get along. I know the excuses. I know it. Trust me. I can also write a book on it. Doesn't matter. Holiness means finding a way to get together. That's what it means. And it's not the first time it's been a battle. It goes back to the Torah. It goes back to Midjan. It goes back to Moses. Why do you think God calls Moses to do it? Because it takes a Moses. It takes the Moses within us, as we'll see at the end of this chapter. All right. That's it for today. I'm going to just quickly address in the comments. I see one comment that says, does this mean that you should, I already addressed that. Hate the ideology but not the individual. How can we force someone to change? You can only control yourself. Correct. You can't force someone else to be in the state of love. We can only, or unity, we can only move ourselves into that space. But if we all did that, guess what? The world would look very different. Change begins right here. Not in my microphone. Change begins right in me. If I want to change the world, I begin by changing myself. That's the purpose of this discourse. The purpose of this text, of this mystical text, is to change, to encourage us to change ourselves. Not to, Sandrine is asking, what are practical actions toward that goal? Once we get practical, that's a time that we need to sign off. No, I'm kidding. Practically speaking, it begins with looking at ourselves. I would say it begins with looking through our relationships and figuring out which relationship. Guarantee that the other person is going to be open to it? No. But if I come from a place of sincerity, a place of egoless sincerity, it's not about me. It's my ego is not bruised. What ego? I don't know what you're talking about. No ego. Egoless. It's about the goal of connecting with that person and reestablishing that connection. If we approach it in that way, the other person is much more likely to feel that and to embrace it and to reflect that to us. Kamayim hapanim alpanim, like water reflects the face. King Solomon writes. I'm quoting King Solomon right now. As water reflects the face to a face, in other words, you can see your mirror in the reflection of water, so too, Kain lev ha'adam ba'adam, so too does one heart reflect another. When we come from a place of ego, the other person comes from a place of ego. If we come from an egoless place of connection, they are more likely to also reflect that. Guaranteed? Absolutely not. But are they more likely to? 100%. Right? Okay, we got to close it out because we ran very late today. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me quickly recap. What we did today. What we did today was we explored the seven deadly sins of Judaism and Kabbalah based on the 7 character traits of the human soul. We looked at what they are in their distorted forms, and then arrived at the evil, at deadly sins, so to speak, or negative incarnations of those character traits. We then spoke about how there's one, the 8th, that is worse than all of them put together, and that is baseless hatred, divisiveness, disunity, lack of unity. We said that opposes not just individual letters of God's name, but the whole totality of God's name. That is not just 7 nations or 7 flaws. That's like the general flaw that damages us and the universe as a whole. And we described how, according to the Talmud, how that is the sin, that was the vice. Comes with, it's hard to justify some of the other stuff, but when it comes to baseless hatred, we immediately justify it as based hatred. What do you mean baseless? Maybe that's for someone else. My hatred is firmly grounded in solid rationale. Exactly, 100%. That's what we call baseless hatred. That's the point. Anyway, that's it for today. So on a practical level, I would say let us look deeply inside and look at our relationships and identify maybe this week one relationship that could use a little bit of work. And let's be brave, and let's be egoless, and let's be the first ones to step out of ourselves and step in and say, I'm here, I want to reconnect. Let's reconnect. People are looking for connections. Now is a great time to do that. We'll continue this discussion next week. We have a lot more to talk about. We're not finished with chapter 17. I'm going to pick it up right where we left off, and we'll continue the conversation. Look out for some emails, and look out on social media for some new classes launching. This week, we're going to prep for some new classes that are starting. Well, we have some that are starting this week, but many that are starting next week. So look out for all that information coming soon to an inbox or Facebook feed near you. Thank you for joining me today for Kabbalah Coffee. Shavua Tov. Be well, stay healthy, and stay happy and loving. We'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Great to see everyone.
Shabbat Tov, thank you.
Pleasure. We'll see you all.